For those of you who didn't watch the last video, shame on you, go do it now. You done? Good. Then let's crack on. Fresh out of the portal, Lael barely bats an eye at the fact Amida Tellian has brought him to Kingdom Hearts. She promptly begins to swap into a spare body she had in a cupboard, so Lael ransacks her stuff and finds that she nicked his Alexis contract. After this, the pair have a touching exchange in rather large inverted commas before Lael heads back to the other side of reality to talk to Sid for what feels like the millionth time. Sid tells him that Vigali is now his patron before getting back to the plot and mentioning the Lilty Tribal Ball for Unity, the concept not the engine. Lael therefore decides to gatecrash to talk to Altair, who he figured out was the princess at some point. To this end, he takes the shuttle through the capital and jumps off it halfway along the route. This lands him in the airship graveyard from the start of the game, where he finds the king in a jam. He has little time to be surprised by this though, since Jagran shows up and starts talking to the airship. Wisely, Lael does a runner and sneaks into the palace. Inside the palace, we observe Altair talking politics with Lilty elders, who look like the result of a human scrotum breeding with a gooseberry bush. Lael realises that the dude probably isn't smart casual, so abducts a man in a tuxedo, then heads for the ballroom, where we are promptly forced into a minigame which is only 2 degrees less excruciating than influenza. After mamboing over to the princess, Lael tries to blackmail her into handing over the crystal idol, after which he still tries to take the moral high ground on the resurrection of the Yuke tribe, whereupon Altair drops the bombshell that the Yukes left a doomsday spell on the Lilty crystal, so bringing them back would kill the Lilty instead. After trying to form an opinion on this for at least 3 seconds, Lael makes a smug exit by sliding off the balcony. Cue Jagran, who simply walks up to the princess, not being the type to tango. The pair then share some blows about the fact that Altair was convening with the world's most wanted man before Jagran slouches off again. This is followed by an entirely pointless scene in the junkyard where the game felt it necessary to highlight the fact that Lael gets changed. The following day, Lael meets with Kais at the gates of the capital to witness the Chocobo cavalry being dispatched with orders to arrest the entire Selkie guild on flimsy grounds. Lael decides to follow and reaches the guild just in time for everyone to have already been arrested ages ago. He meets Belle, who has finally realised that holding a photo of Jagran that he'd rather she didn't might have repercussions. At this point, she voices her intention to charge for the rescue of the people she condemned, whereupon Lael takes the moral high ground again, though somewhat more justifiably. Only now, however, do we stop to consider the fact that the Selkies have been taken to the aerial prison, which is kind of hard to reach for self-evident reasons. Lael therefore finds a portal and heads back to Amida Tellian to get her to make him another portal to the prison. Whilst he does this, he talks to her about the doomsday spell, and she, not unreasonably, couldn't give a fuck about the Lilties. Even so, she assures Lael that she'll think about it and teleports him aboard the prison. After some glaringly out-of-place concept art establishing shots of the prison, Lael meets Belle in the entrance hall, where she smarms a bit about how she managed to smuggle herself in on a cargo ship. Lael then does some jumping about, but by the time he catches up to Belle, she's already moved on. In her pursuit, Lael gets locked in a room where we leave him whilst we watch a cutscene featuring slightly more enigmatic people. During this cutscene, we see Jagran rock up where the Selkies have been imprisoned, get threatened by 2 of them, then turn these same people into jam. Belle sees this from a nearby balcony and shouts at Jagran a bit, but he's busy not giving a shit. Back to Lael, we have to fight the most difficult battle of the game by an absolute street before we can make it to where the Selkies are being held. Once there, Lael sees that Jagran is a bear and buys the Selkies time to escape in the most excruciating of the minigames by throwing both random accusations and pipes at Jagran. Once Lael has saved at least 1 or 2 Selkies, depending on individual ham-handedness, Kais turns up to order their release by royal appointment, apparently not noticing all the ones that Jagran just turned into jam and the fact that none are left in the room anyway. Jagran has officially fallen into the villain category, however, and decides not to give a shit, drawing his weapon and attacking Kais. Lael is on hand to help, but at this juncture is distracted by the portal that appears in the room. True to form, Amida Tellian has appeared at the worst possible moment, which Lael laments with the timeless phrase, "Amida Tellian, not now!" Once she's been yanked out of the portal, she promptly steals all the prison's crystals, causing the place to fall apart somewhat. This makes a big hole through which Belle promptly falls, and which Jagran and Kais both jump down since it seems like a lot of fun. Amida Tellian then defaults back to her usual plan of fixing things by summoning Zoo before we go through a somewhat baffling scene transition and find ourselves in a deleted scene from The Phantom Menace. Once here, Amida Tellian seems to be so stuck in her defaults that she's back to complaining that Lael can't keep the prison from crashing because, and I quote Lael here, "it's too damn big." After this piece of out-of-context gold, the focus shifts to Kais battling Jagran on a gantry and starting to lose ground. Luckily, however, Vigali comes to the rescue, throwing Belle and Kais to Lael and facing Jagran, only to get immediately turned into jam. Vigali downed, Jagran turns his attention on the 3 Stooges and blows up the platform they're on by throwing his sword. Before we have time to think about this, Amida Tellian sends a Zoo to stop our protagonists from falling to their deaths. The Zoo drops them somewhere near Bridgetown and they do some contemplating before Lael goes to meet Amida Tellian for the second resurrection. After another encounter with everybody's favourite slab of bricks and possessed mortar, Lael meets Amida Tellian in the crystal chamber where he brings up the doomsday spell again. Before Amida Tellian is done telling him that she's taken precautions, Jagran shows up about 2 inches behind Lael, apparently being very good at stealth and concealment, as you can see from his stature. Amida Tellian is able to act fast enough to stop Lael being jammed, but gets the brunt of it herself. Finally capable of having an emotion, Lael starts attacking Jagran with any rubble to hand, but the smug bastard makes an escape before he's ground to dust. An actually rather touching exchange happens between Lael and Amidatellian, in which Lael comes perilously close to being emotional as Amidatellian uses her dying energy to restore the penultimate arm of the crystal. Once this is done, Lael leaves the crystalline Amidatellian and returns to the surface, only to be met by Jagran, who has managed to amass a platoon to apprehend Lael in the time that Lael had a short conversation. Unfortunately for Jagran, the platoon doesn't seem all too keen on arresting Lael, the reason for which soon becomes clear as Altair rocks up with Belle in tow and orders the arrest of Jagran the Crystal Bearer, Belle presumably having sold her the information necessary to save the world, the wanker. After Kais gets in Jagran's grill, the latter officially stops giving a shit and has an evil monologue before grabbing Kais by the neck and being mere moments from jamming him before Lael's newfound emotions kick in and he starts beating the shit out of Jagran by crushing him into the floor. After whining for a bit about Jagran possibly being able to save her father, Altair fires a single warning shot at Lael, an act which apparently takes all the exertion she has. After a quick fade through black, we find the Three Stooges' Sid's workshop, this being the default place to go for the game when it's not sure how to continue. We are brought up to speed by Kais talking about the fact that the princess is going to make Jagran cure the king somehow, whereupon Lael decides to go to the city to be present. After walking from Bridgetown to the city for the umpteenth fucking time, Lael meets Kais and they board a shuttle for the castle. Meanwhile, aboard the old Alexis in the junkyard, Jagran is stood before the king and Altair looks on expectantly. Not being one for doing as he's told, Jagran has another evil monologue before he attempts to smash the king. Altair's having none of it, however, and leaps at his arm. Unsurprisingly, the huge man with a fucking massive sword and combat training wins the fight and proceeds to smash the king. The upwelling of searing emotion conveyed perfectly by Altair's voice actress causes her crystal idol to go haywire and start absorbing all the remaining remnants of the Uke crystal. At this point, we cut back to Lael and Kais currently flying over the city in a shuttle powered by hope and fairy dust. Oh no, wait, it's powered by crystal shards and immediately starts to fall out of the sky. The player is then called upon to start using Lael's powers to keep the shuttle from crashing by waggling the Wii remote to a degree that could give even the world's biggest wanker carpal tunnel. Without any indication of whether this worked, we rejoin Altair in the junkyard. As the crystal idol is busy doing its thing, Jagran leaves the airship and commits mass murder by jamming all the nearby guards with his reactor-powered powers. He then returns to monologuing and talks the balls off Altair before trying to jam her and failing, discovering that she's a bearer. He thinks this is perfect apparently and does some evil guffawing. Deciding the best thing to do is leave him to it, we return to Lael and Kais. Apparently the sacrifice of the player's wrist was enough to stop the shuttle from exploding on contact with the ground, and everyone is dusting themselves down as they notice that Jagran has taken to the skies in the old Alexis. Happily, Belle arrives with complaints, but also news that Sid has finished installing a steam engine on the Alexis we flew from the start of the game, and so we run over there, only to be told that Lael will have to still use his powers to keep it in the air, so what was the bloody point? We then take a rather sudden scene transition to space, or more accurately high enough in the skies that the developers can get away with not having to render the ground, since the Wii's processor wouldn't even be able to think about doing that before catching fire. Once in space, we see Lael flying along quite happily before Jagran shows up in the old Alexis, to which he has fitted a gun that could best be described as irresponsibly large. The player is then tasked with steering sharply either left or right, but if you pick left you die. Realising there's no other way, Sid takes the helm from Lael, he apparently not being necessary to fly the ship anymore, and oh, shut up. Lael proceeds to board the old Alexis, at which juncture Jagran aims at the lilty crystal, apparently having gone completely mad. Sid, however, is having none of it and sacrifices the Alexis himself to save the crystal. Lael briefly has an emotion before we see Sid escaping in a smaller craft, so that consequence apparently wasn't a consequence, thank goodness. Back to Lael, and he's finally in a position to confront Jagran. Upon finding him stood on the deck of the airship as opposed to flying the damn thing, we're shown that Jagran has integrated the princess into some sort of pulley system apparently. Noticing Altair is a bearer, Lael completely ignores this and starts shouting at Jagran about other things. Jagran misses this fact completely and starts going on about how Altair is a bearer and how the crystal principle rules all and stuff before he finally gets to the point and loudly declares, "This is the power of gods!" Lael dismisses this, and so being a mature person, Jagran throws a shit fit and says that he'll resurrect the Uke crystal, doing this by dropping the crystal idol overboard while still attached to Altair. Lael goes in pursuit as Jagran starts guffawing, as this is apparently all he has left. Needless to say that Lael catches Altair, but the idol is lost in the process and the resurrection begins. Altair says she'll go to try to save the lilty crystal, so Lael drops her onto a zoo, which apparently just materialise out of the fucking ether whenever the plot necessitates it, and goes to punch Jagran in the face. After stating a couple of glaringly obvious truths, Lael is met with another sodding evil laugh, whereupon Jagran decides to crystallise the entire Alexis using the newfound power created by the resurrection. We see a slightly impressive transformation sequence as Jagran becomes some sort of massively weaponized floating head, sending Lael flying. After Jagran does some more self-aggrandization, we cut to Lael, who hasn't been blessed with a giant head of his own, but has at least got a flying surfboard and some kind of crystalline rash. After a terrifying shot of Lael's face, the final battle commences. Needless to say, the final battle is ridiculously over the top, but the game has been reasonably restrained up to this point, so it's probably earned it. It's quite good fun, actually, and the final blow where Lael smashes through Jagran's ship's core and blows it to pieces is very satisfying and therefore completely unamusing. Following a definitely mutually lethal explosion, Jagran and Lael are both left floating about 1,000,000 miles above the ground. After a while of thinking about it, gravity kicks in and the pair start plummeting. Not worrying about this fact, Lael flips over and starts having a look around, spotting Altair's energy failing as the Doomsday spell progresses. However, Amida Tellian was a woman of her word. I know that she's never actually referred to as a woman, but her voice actor is an adult female doing an adult female voice, and what more do you want, and has sent the Uke Service Support Division to save the Lilty Crystal. However, the world's most petty man is still on hand, and Jagran grabs Lael in mid-fall in this rather suspect screenshot and starts to beat the shit out of him. Lael retaliates, between Jagran shouting about how they lost their bearer powers and how the Crystal Principle doesn't need them. Lael isn't really interested and just keeps punching Jagran until the big bastard starts choking him to death, whereupon Lael's face explodes. After a long black screen, we come back to reality and see the ending of Star Wars Episode 4. During this ending, the princess talks with Kais, offering him the position of High Commander of the Lilty Army, which he turns down for stupid reasons. She then asks him if he's found Lael yet, whereupon Kais gives her a rather harsh reality check and it is revealed that all bearer powers have disappeared. Belle then turns up and talks some gibberish about finding Lael before the princess gets back to her royal engagement and secures tribal unity with the Ukes. After all this is over, we follow Kais to the airship dock, where he arrives just in time to see his airship taking off without him. Upon asking Sid, it turns out that the smuggest character in gaming has nicked it, but it wouldn't let me take a screenshot of Belle in the airship for some reason, so here's a public domain photo of a plane. Belle then flies through some more incredibly ugly concept art environments before we cut to a seemingly irrelevant boat in the middle of the open sea. We've arrived at this boat just in time to see a little girl in her best dress lose her hat to the wind, but before it's lost to the skies, a strange blue force surrounds it and is placed gently back on her head. She turns to thank the person who caught her hat, but he tells her to think nothing of it, and we join Lael as he stares off the prow of the ship, sailing for pastures new. Now, I don't know what you think, or care particularly either. That's a really good ending to the game, and I hope that this video will be the same for the channel. So thank you for watching, and so long. Well, this is embarrassing. Long story short, I had originally intended to make this my last YouTube video, but now it's not going to be because I am useless and indecisive. I did, however, like the following sequence, so you can sit through that. Christ, I'm a Burke.